Hey everyone, this is a review of Milwaukee's new M12 high output batteries, the 2.5 amp hour and the 5 amp hour version. So I wanted to test Milwaukee's claims of these outputting 25% more power and also running 25% cooler. So I've got a couple fairly high draw tools here, probably the most being the M12 circular saw. I've got the new Gen 3 M12 drill that we're going to test with these, and then the M12 fuel vacuum for runtime and then heat and suction power. All right, so here are all of the batteries up close, and you can see there's a big physical difference between the plastic housing on both of these batteries. Milwaukee says they have made the 5 amp hour and 2.5 amp hour batteries out of a different plastic that is more resistant to oils and solvents that you might see in an automotive environment. Other than that, the batteries are pretty much the same exact form factor. You've got a little bit different on the molding right here. You've got one rib here for grip instead of two. That's really about the only difference that I see. This pack is a little bit slimmer in the front, it looks like. It doesn't have the arc that the other XC packs do. It's more flat on top, but really it's pretty much the same form factor. Like any compact pack, this one has 3 cells in the stem portion of it. It's just, instead of a 2 amp hour cell, 3 of them, you've got 3 2.5 amp hour cells. Same with the XC pack. You've got 6 cells in the 5 amp hour. Same with the 4 and the 6 amp hour. You've just got 6 cells at different amp hour ratings. For the M12 saw test, I thought this would be the best way to test stalling the batteries and seeing how they handled it. This thing, I usually use this for plywood. That is why I have a finish blade in it. And I figured if I'm going to do some 2x4 cuts to test its power output for each of these batteries, I give it an extra challenge and leave the finish blade in it instead of putting a framing blade in it. So that is going to take a little bit longer. It's going to require a little bit more power of the saw, and we'll get a better idea of how much output these batteries can manage. So for the saw test, I took just a regular 2x4. I did 3 cuts, and I only measured time of the blade actually touching the wood until the piece dropped away. So that means we're not having my inference of like, I didn't get to the second cut as fast as I should have. It's all just cut after cut after cut, averaged together for the average time. Now, I didn't build a sled or anything like this because honestly, in real life, I want to know, can I feel the difference of these batteries and push them just before they stall the saw? So this is all by my feel of pushing this thing as hard as I can. And the results on this one were pretty clear between the 2 amp hour and the 2.5 amp hour battery. It was an average of 3.33 seconds per cut for the regular 2 amp hour. For the 2.5 amp hour, we were at 2.36. That's a second faster per cut with these batteries. The other ones were pretty much neck and neck. They were all right at 2 seconds per cut. I couldn't really tell much of a difference between all 3 of them. Now for the drill, this was a high draw test with a little less input from me because I used a self-feed spade bit. It's a 1/2 inch diameter hole through a 2x4, and I did 3 each for these and just let it go. And that feed rate is controlled by the spade bit itself because it's got that feed spiral on the front of it. So for this, I did all the tests in Speed 2 with a freshly charged battery, and the only one that couldn't make it through without stalling was the regular 2 amp hour battery. So this one definitely does output less power. Whenever it stalled, I just pulled the trigger again and kept going, and it eventually made it through. So that's the times you see on this. All the other ones made it straight through without stalling. And there's a definite advantage for the 2.5 amp hour over the regular 2 amp hour again. And there's also, there's an advantage you can see with the 5 amp hour over both the 4 amp hour and the 6 amp hour. Those were roughly tied, and this one pulled ahead by like 1/3 of a second. Now for the vacuum, I did a couple different tests. I did a static suction test in low and in high. There wasn't much of a difference in low. It was all within about 2 inches of water lift from each other using the suction gauge. But for high, you started to see a difference. There was a little bit better performance from the 2.5 amp hour over the 2 amp hour. And then the 4 did better than the 2.5 amp hour. And then we peaked out with the 5. And then the 6 amp hour was roughly equal to the 4 for water lift. So once again, in this test, the 5 amp hour XC gave a slight advantage over the other two XC packs. I also did a runtime test with the vacuum, and you can see from this graph, the results weren't quite linear. They were close, but they weren't quite. So I normalized the runtime by amp hour and got some interesting results. So these normalized results, the 2 amp hour did the worst. That's not surprising because it's having the most power output from the least number of cells. The 2.5 amp hour actually did the best out of all of these. And then it declined in capacity. The 4 amp hour did a little bit better than the 5 amp hour, did a little bit better than the 6 amp hour. And I think the reason behind this is the more amp hours you stuff into a cell, the higher your energy storage density, and then you can't discharge that energy as fast usually. That's usually the trade-off with the higher capacity cells, is they can't output as much current. So that's probably why we see a little bit of an efficiency drop the more energy dense these cells become. The other reason I think the 2.5 amp hour did the best on this test is it's putting out slightly less power than those XC packs. From our suction test, we know that. So it's not quite making the vacuum work as hard, so which is probably why it's a little more efficient. And lastly, I did a temperature test with the vacuum. Initially, I started measuring the temperature after the runtime test, and then I realized the batteries were all going for different amounts of time, and that wasn't fair. So I redid it. I just put these batteries in and did 5 minutes for each battery. The 2 amp hour barely made it to that 5-minute mark, but it did. And then I measured the temperature with a thermal camera right after that. And the compact packs were pretty much the same. And the XC packs were pretty much the same. The 4 amp hour was slightly cooler. Once again, I think that's because these 2 amp hour cells probably have a higher discharge rate than the other ones that they're actually rated for. And I think Milwaukee's just pushing the limits a little bit more with the 2.5 amp hour and 5 amp hour for those cells. So I think Milwaukee's claims that these high output batteries are running 25% cooler, they're a little bit dubious. But remember, this is making the vacuum work a little bit harder than this one is, and same with the 5 amp hour over the other XC packs. So you could make the argument that it's putting out more power and it's running at the same temperature. So overall, yes, we did see an increase in power output from these two new batteries. I think the most significant jump is for the 2 amp hour to the 2.5 amp hour as far as performance goes for these. The 5 amp hour, yes, it does edge out the other two in power output, but just barely. I didn't see, that big of a leap forward for the XC packs. Definitely, this is worth looking at if you like having lighter tools, because this lets you have close to the power of an XC pack without having the extra bulk of it. So I think the 2.5 amp hour gives you the biggest advantage here. So hopefully this review was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what y'all think about these new batteries, if they're worth the extra price, or if you're just gonna stick with the regular ones. These are pretty pricey. I think this one's $120 and this one is $80. I got them on sale together for $150. I thought that was a decent deal, but I think I'd more look for these in kits and as bonuses than going out and buying a bunch by themselves.